What you got there?
It's a smoothie.
Hey, how's it going everybody? This is Devin with PubStomp MTG, and today in this video I wanted to showcase all the decks I am currently playing right now in Commander. And the reason why I wanted to make this video is because MagicCon 2024 in Las Vegas is coming pretty quickly, and I do plan on attending. This is actually my first MagicCon that I will ever attend, so I am absolutely excited for this. I can't wait to play with some of you, and that's why I wanted to bring up this video today and talk about some of my decks, because I actually am going to be making a voting on which decks to bring to MagicCon. I'm going to be doing the voting on my Discord, so if you do want to go check it out, make sure to use the link down below. Currently I do have 10 decks. They all have different ranges of power levels, and I'm going to be talking about them all today in this video. Alright, so the first deck I wanted to focus on today is Oher Ashneel. This is one powerful commander that focuses on burn and a little bit of a Voltron theme. I wanted to focus on this deck specifically because it's a very fun burn commander. I played this a long time ago, but I decided to scrap it, but then a lot of cards came up from Duskmourn, made me want to brew around this commander again, so I decided, hey, I'm putting this back into paper. And obviously it's a very mean commander in a lot of different ways, especially if you do have a lot of punishing effects like Rolling Vortex and Sulfuric Vortex, because instead of dealing 1 damage, you're going to be dealing 4 damage or more depending on Oher Ashneel's power. I mentioned this was a Voltron theme, so I thought Toralf would be a great fit because of the backside, because it'll make Oher Ashneel's power +3/+0, and plus on the front side, if you deal a lot of damage to your opponent's creatures, you could just spread that out somewhere else too, so I thought this would be a fun include. From Duskmourn though, there was a lot of need cards that I wanted to showcase, especially Razorkin Needlehead, because instead of dealing 1 damage to your opponents, you're going to be dealing 4 damage, or however much Oher Ashneel's power is. So I thought this would be a very scary card to face up against. I do have some other burn spells. Of course, Lightning Bolt is a notorious one, and also Fury is a very fun one. Obviously it did get banned in Modern, so that's why the price is a little cheaper. That's why I wanted to pick it up. But one of my favorite cards I included in this deck is the Roller Crusher Ride. I know this doesn't necessarily synergize with Oher Ashneel. Damage Doublers is a different effect compared to Oher Ashneel's ability, because it's essentially replacing that effect. Besides that point, I did mention this is a mean deck. I did include Magus of the Moon and Blood Moon itself. This one is pretty degenerate. A lot of people are pretty greedy on their mana bases. That's why I put this in this deck. It's more of a high power deck, one focusing on a lot of different aspects, but I would say Oher Ashneel is not for the faint of heart. This is definitely one that I usually pull out with people who are kind of okay with a lot of different burn spells and stacks. So again, I have about 50% of this pretty much done. I just have to get the rest of the cards and some of the basic lands. The next deck I wanted to focus on is Megatron Tyrant. I loved watching Transformers as a kid, so obviously I had to make this deck. I made this a long time ago, and I previously mentioned it in another video focusing on my decks. This one is focusing on flinging a bunch of artifacts to your opponent's creatures so that you can deal damage to their face if it's excess damage. And so I immediately fell in love with this commander. I think there's a lot of cool, interesting ways of building around it. One hard problem I did find with this deck is the fact that I had to flip back and forth with this commander, so I decided to get some separate sleeves using for the backside. For example, red with my gray colored sleeves. I decided, okay, the backside is always going to be the red color coordinated ones, so that way when I had Megatron on the battlefield, all I had to do was just flip it to the other side, and that's basically like my sideboard, if you could call it that. So that way I didn't have to flip back and forth, and that does include all the Decepticons in this list that can be in the deck. I didn't want to include Autobots because it's a Decepticon deck, obviously. I didn't want to focus on having Autobots in just exclusively a Decepticon deck. I feel like that'd be a flavor fail. Besides that point, there are a lot of cool, interesting cards in this deck that I wanted to focus on. There are some that do have death triggers like Wormcoil Engine. I also do have Ruin Grinder in the deck, which could discard your hand and draw 7 cards. That does include your opponents, but you are dealing damage in the process, so I thought it'd be a fun include. Another one that is from the Fallout set is Rose. This one is pretty good because at the end of combat on your turn, if you attack this turn, create a junk token for each opponent that you attacked. So this is great to get some junk tokens on the battlefield. And whenever you sacrifice a junk token, you add a red mana, so this is just adding more mana into your mana pool. I did also add some Necrons because they're pretty powerful with artifact synergies. And Rakir, when attacking, you could just basically put an artifact on your side of the battlefield for paying life. And Cryptek could essentially just reuse an artifact, putting it back onto the battlefield when you sacrifice with Megatron. So these are some options that are very powerful in the deck. When I made a deck hack about Megatron a long time ago, and I would say a very long time ago because it's what, about like 2 years ago. I also focus on the Mech Titan core. This is essentially just Devastator because Devastator focuses on combining a bunch of Transformers together to make a super Transformer essentially, and I thought the Mech Titan core is essentially doing that, so I wanted to make it a little bit thematic in that aspect. So yeah, Megatron is a fun deck. If you haven't tried out Megatron, I would implore you to try it out. It is very fun, and that's why I decided to have some of the red sleeves so that you could just switch back and forth instead of taking them out of the sleeve and putting it back on the other side. But again, a very fun deck and one that I would absolutely recommend. Next deck I wanted to focus on is a Robo Roar of the World. This one is more of a casual deck. If I had to basically give it a power ranking level, because now we're focusing on 1 through 4, this is definitely more towards the pre-con level. It does have some pretty powerful cards, so maybe it would be like more of a 1 to 2 range. Again, I don't know how that system's completely going to work, but this is essentially my wife's deck that I usually like to play casually with. But this one does have a decent amount of powerful cards. This is partnered, or I should say companioned, with Kahira the Orphan Guard, giving your cats +1/+1. This one is just focusing on making sure that you only have cats in your deck. This one has a mix of tokens, also buffing up your creatures, and putting a bunch of cats on the battlefield is pretty straightforward. Obviously, Ezekiel's Chariot is a very fun one because it focuses on putting a lot of cat tokens on the battlefield. One win con would be a Chrome as well. This is essentially just going to help you close out the game with a bunch of cats you do have on the battlefield. Sovereign Okonek Ao is basically just insane with a Robo because you're giving a cat +3/+3 and it'll get additional +3/+3 counters on it, so that's pretty insane in that aspect when you do attack with Sovereign. Lurking Predators is another one that's pretty powerful. It does focus on putting a lot more creatures on the battlefield the more spells your opponents cast, and this could get out of hand with a lot of cats on the battlefield too. And I like this more as a flavor win because I do have 2 cats of my own that are basically Lurking Predators around the house, especially towards night. When they get the zoomies, they're just going crazy on us and we're always waking up constantly. It doesn't happen a lot, but every so often it does. But one of my wife's favorite cards is Hungry Lynx, mainly because I did make a proxy of this with this kind of art because this does look like our cat Cleo. So I put this in the deck because it obviously synergizes with cats, buffing them up when rats do die. Plus on top of that, one of my friends do play a rat deck, so this kind of hoses them in a situation like that. But I'd say that's mainly it. There's not too much to explain about this deck. It's just putting a lot of kitty cats in the deck and going against your opponents and trying to win by combat damage. A very simple, effective deck that my wife loves to play. So now that I talked about a light, casual, warm, happy cat deck, now let's focus on evil, basically. Let's talk about the Master of Keys. This is one that I actually made a CDH deck around, but this one focuses on basically getting infinite mana and then putting a reanimation effect like Animate Dead in the graveyard with a Thassa's Oracle to win out the game that way. Again, this is CDH. Normally I won't play Thassa's Oracle at anywhere else, but since it's the best win con in CDH, I have it there. There is a lot of ways to get infinite mana. One way is using Luris, the Dream Den, Displacerkin, and also Lotus Petal. You just have that way of sacrificing Lotus Petal, playing Lotus Petal from the graveyard with Luris, then you flicker Luris with the Displacerkin to repeat the process to get infinite mana, and then you go ahead and dump all the infinite mana into your commander. But I will say this does make Mystic Remora a lot better, because one thing that has a downside for Mystic Remora is that you have to sacrifice it for the cumulative upkeep. If the cumulative upkeep is too much, you can just put it into the graveyard, exile 3 more cards, and then pay the mana cost to play it again and then reset essentially. This is also a Necropotence deck. I focus on a lot of different Born Upon the Wind lines too to win the game. I do also focus on Lion's Eye Diamond and Ariok Salvagers to get infinite mana, so dump into our commander. Also, this is a Hullbreaker Horror Outlet to focus on getting infinite mana to dump into your commander to win the game that way too. I also love the idea of using Saw in Half and Hoarding Broodlord to basically get to your win cons. And what I like about this commander is we do have a lot of different ways to get reanimation effects that are enchantments. For example, Dance of the Dead, Animate Dead, and Necromancy. Like I mentioned previously, this is a Demonic Consultation Thassa's Oracle deck, so obviously gotta throw it in there to win the game. But that's basically a straightforward version of the Master of Keys. I did more of a deep dive in the deck tech. Again, you can go check it out. So with that said, let's go on to the next one. The next commander I wanted to focus on is Zeno SC Rebels. A lot of people are pretty familiar with this, and this is actually the first commander deck that I've ever built, and I decided, hey, I wanted to build it again because this is one that basically represents commander and how I like to play. And of course, that is extra combats and big giant creatures. I'm a Timmy at heart when it comes to it. There are some new additions I wanted to focus on from this year. Fanatic of Ronus is a super dork, essentially adding 4 mana when you have a creature with power 4 or greater on the battlefield. Another really powerful creature that came out this year was Overlord of the Hauntwoods. This is great to put more lands on the battlefield on ETB and attack. And of course, with Zeno SC Rebels on the battlefield, we could get both triggers on the same turn. Another classic that I absolutely love that we got a new art for is Terror of the Peaks. That was from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. This is an incredible card because of course we are playing big giant scary creatures, why not throw a lot more damage out when they enter the battlefield? Another very fun card that I absolutely love using is Inferno the Star Mounts in the deck, because even though it does have haste, you don't have to worry about that so much. It has that ability of paying 1 red, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. When its power becomes 20 this way, it deals 20 damage to any target. This has a pretty powerful synergy with Zeno SC Rebels, because if we pay 3 into this ability, we can make it a 9/9. We could double the power of Inferno the Star Mounts, swing away at one person, and if somebody tries to remove it in response, we could absolutely take advantage of that ability by paying 2 more mana into it and dealing 20 damage to that person. That actually won me the game in one instance that I will never forget, because it's one crazy way to win, by the way. This is an extra combat deck, so I love cards like Last Night Together and Seize the Day. I know my camera's a little blurry, but these cards are great because we could get those extra combats, especially Last Night Together, where they could get indestructible. There are ways we could get infinite combats. The most common way is using Aggravated Assault and some sort of way to get mana like Old Gnawbone. There's a lot of different ways by using Savage Ventmaw, Shriekwood Devourer, and Neheb the Eternal. So that way we could just swing at all our opponents in the air and basically kill them. So that's one easy way of winning the game. Another fun way of winning the game is using Fling Effects. I absolutely love this art from the Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So of course I had to throw that in there, and obviously when we keep doubling the amount of power our creatures have, we could just fling for even more damage. So again, this is just a classic deck that I love playing. I probably will try to keep it in paper forever at this point, but who knows what kind of decks will come out in the future, especially with Marvel. The next deck I'm very fond about is Helga Skittish Seer. This is basically another fun big giant Timmy deck that focuses on putting a lot of big creatures on the battlefield. This is basically a super dork for those creatures power 4 or greater, and when you do cast those spells, you could buff her up, put a 1/1 counter on her, and gain some life. It basically does a lot of things for you, and that's why I did decide to have Kurugha the Macro Sage as a companion. It's a little bit more jank, but I feel like honestly it's more of a flavor win to put Kurugha as a companion because it's a dinosaur hippo with a frog. What's cooler than that? But because there is the cost to Kurugha, I decided to have some adventure spells because it kind of mitigates that in a way. So I thought of Brazen Borrower, Swordcoat Serpent, and Tempest Heart. They all have that adventure cost of doing some kind of ability. Both of them do bounce, and Tempest Heart does kind of loot for you, so that way you could find cards better in those turn 1, turn 2 situations. So because of Kurugha, this is not necessarily a fast deck because we don't even have Soul Ring and Arcane Signet in this deck. And when the ball gets rolling, it gets rolling, and there's very little things that could stop this deck in my opinion. I did also put in some untappers, for example Kiora and also Sereth. They have that ability of untapping your commander to add more mana to play bigger creatures. Plus Kiora does act as a great card draw outlet because whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield, you draw a card. That's perfect with our commander. And with Sereth the Viper thing, other untapped creatures you could draw up hexproof. This could act as a great way of protecting your creatures too. Some of the best creatures in this deck are Vigor, Surak, and Goreclaw as a way to give all our creatures haste when they enter the battlefield, Nyx Bloom Ancient to really triple all our mana, Apex Devastator to cascade into bigger and bigger things, Coma the Cosmo Serpent, which is really hard to remove. Elvish Nord is another way we could buff up our commander, all the while giving our opponent's creatures -2/-2, so that way we could trample on them even further. Clonian Hydra is another way to basically put a lot more counters on our commander. And Railway Brawler is probably one of my favorite cards because you could just put a lot of 1/1 counters on creatures depending on how much power they do have when they enter on the battlefield. But I would say by far the best card in this deck is Intruder Alarm. This is absolutely cracked with our commander because once it gets going, it really gets going. It's basically just an avalanche waiting to happen when these two are on the battlefield. Because our commander is drawing cards, we can put more creatures on the battlefield, untap all our creatures, play another big spell, untap all our creatures back and forth until we basically put our whole entire library on our battlefield. And with Surak and Goreclaw, if you're giving them all haste and trample, it's most likely going to be a good game for all our opponents. So again, this is a very slow deck with Kurugha as the companion, but I kind of like that about the deck. You're not so threatening at the beginning of the game, but late in the game, it's really hard to beat you. The next commander I wanted to focus on is Omnath, Locus of Creation. This is more of a new deck, technically an old deck because I built this a long time ago as a CDH commander, but I decided to rebuild it again. Mainly because of the bans. I used to have Atali Primal Conquer as my food chain outlet in the command zone. I had decided, well, Atali's not so viable anymore, so I switched it to Omnath because it is 4 colors. And recently Play to Win made a episode where they talked about Omnath, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that deck. I want to build it again too. Especially now that Atali is basically nerfed with all 3 of the bans affecting it, which is kind of unfortunate, but I do get to put Atali in a dinosaur deck too, so that's not all a loss. But like I mentioned before, Food Chain and Squee the Immortal are essentially the way to win the game. You get infinite mana with Squee the Immortal, you use Omnath's ability to enter the battlefield, draw a card, then exile with Food Chain, recast it over and over again until you draw your whole entire deck. And in this deck specifically, I have it winning with a Walking Ballista, dumping all that mana into it, blasting everybody in the face. And that's why I decided to add Heliod Suncrown Walking Ballista combo in there. I know it's not the most optimal combo, but you do gain 4 life whenever a land enters the battlefield the first time, with Omnath specifically, so I thought it's a good fit. This is also an Underworld Breach, Lion's Eye Diamond, Brain Freeze deck that focuses on getting them into the graveyard with Intuition and Savine's Reclamation so that you could storm off for the win there. And one card I wanted to show off because I love Lord of the Rings is the One Ring. I had this card when it was very cheap. Now it's very expensive. I didn't know how expensive it was going to get, but I'm glad I got my own copy. But yeah, that's the main gist of the deck. Obviously, it focuses on landfall, getting a lot of mana with the fetch lands. And overall, this is a pretty decent CDH deck. Not the best in the world, and definitely not tier 1, but who knows what it will be with all this new meta shakeup. So I mentioned Atali Primal Conqueror. Where did that card specifically go? Well, I put it in my Gishath Sun's Avatar deck. I remade this deck. I switched back and forth with Pantlaza and Gishath. Which one is the better one? I decided to go with Gishath. I have both of them in the deck anyways. Like, Pantlaza is a great card in the 99, just mainly because it provides great utility for your deck. But as far as explosive plays, I love Gishath for that option, plus I love the art. I had the original foil copy and I felt like, I do need to make a deck around this. And so I focused on a lot of big ETB themes because Gishath will cheat in a lot of big dinosaurs when it deals combat damage to a player. And so with cards with great ETBs, the ones I thought about was, of course, Apex Altasaur. This one is a great enabler for basically wiping out the whole board, especially if it does have Indestructible. Verdant Sun's Avatar, when people are dealing a lot of damage to us, we could basically negate that by gaining a lot of life, especially if a lot of dinosaurs enter the battlefield simultaneously with Gishath. And another new addition is Vaultboard Tyrant from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. This one is an amazing card. I love it so much. It basically gives us some decent card draw, and when it does die, it just makes a token copy of itself on the battlefield. Other ETB creatures I wanted to focus on is Galta Stampede Tyrant and Atali Primal Conqueror. You already know how good Atali Primal Conqueror is, so I don't need to talk about that too much. But Galta Stampede Tyrant is essentially great because if you have a haste outlet on the battlefield and you cast Galta Stampede Tyrant and you have a lot of dinosaurs in your hand, that could be spelling good game for a lot of opponents at that point. But a highly underrated card, which I feel like people need to play more in this deck, is Sawhorn Nemesis. This one is absolutely incredible, especially with Gishath. You're basically doubling the damage that Gishath will trigger, at least on one opponent, because you have to choose an opponent to deal double damage with. This actually won me a game in a video that I made recently, so if you want to go check out that Gishath gameplay, make sure to check it out. But of course, this is a Naya deck, and this is the reason why I made 2 different dinosaur decks. I do have the other one I'm going to be talking about later because of Zakama Primal Calamity. This is one of my favorite cards of all time. I wanted to get the Judge promo because the art looks incredible, and it has a lot of splashy effects of gaining you life, dealing damage, and also destroying target artifacts or enchantments. And it's kind of a nombo with Gishath because you are having it enter the battlefield without casting it, so you're not untapping all your lands, which is a bummer, but it makes sense because it's a very powerful ability. But again, the reason why I wanted to make Gishath is because Naya Dinosaurs is really powerful, and obviously I wanted to play Zakama. Also, another big reason is I do have Kahira as the companion, so there is no humans or anything like that whatsoever. It's just strictly dinosaurs in here. And that's why I like Kahira, is because you might as well include it if you're focusing strictly on dinosaurs. So I did mention I have a second dinosaur deck. This one focuses on the movies with Jurassic Park. I had to make sure I got this deck box off at Etsy. I saw this, I'm like, yeah, I'm getting it. So this is a commander pair with Blue and Owen. This is a great option because you could give Blue haste, and then all your dinosaurs entering the battlefield will get haste as well because it has a haste counter. The same can be said for a Menace, Trample, Reach. But if you have any kind of counter, whether it's a Vigilance counter, a Death Touch counter, a Hexproof counter, or anything like those, and you put them on Blue, all your dinosaurs are going to get those abilities too, which I do like because Blue is like a motherly figure in the Jurassic World series. And so passing down traits to the dinosaurs coming forward is an excellent way of flavor. And so I had to add a lot of the Jurassic World stuff, including the lands too, like the mountain. Also, Dino DNA is a great option too. And of course, welcome to ... Jurassic Park on the backside is an excellent flavor choice again. So again, every card that is from Jurassic Park that could fit in this color combination, I do have in this deck, like Hunting Velociraptor. This really cheats in a big dinosaurs in the battlefield. Of course, I also got the Secret Lair with Tyrannosaurus Rex. This has an amazing art. I wish it was Atali Primal Conqueror. If it was Atali Primal Conqueror instead of Atali Primal Storm, I would have probably kept Atali as my commander, mainly because I love T-Rexes. They're probably one of my favorite dinosaurs. I have a lot of favorite dinosaurs. Cresting Mosasaurus is one reason to play Blue in this deck specifically instead of the Naya color combination. Cresting Mosasaurus is basically a whelming way for dinosaurs. Another card that is not super optimal, but I love it because it's another franchise I absolutely love, is Godzilla. So I put Godzilla King of the Monsters in this deck, even though it's not necessarily good, but I thought it was just a fun include. Another reason to play Blue is Nezahal Primal Tide. I've been waiting to put this in a dinosaur deck, and luckily now I had the chance. Again, this was about a year ago when the Jurassic Park set came out. Of course, have to mention Ravenous Tyrannosaurus. This one is one amazing card because if you have a lot of dinosaurs out, you could have them all be devoured by Ravenous Tyrannosaurus. And of course, with blue giving it haste, you could swing away with that big giant Ravenous Tyrannosaurus. Let's just say you sacrifice 3 dinosaurs. It'll become a 15/15 on the battlefield swinging, and then it'll deal excess damage to a creature, and then it'll deal damage to that opponent too. I do have another copy of Valpar Tyrant in this deck. It's just such a great include as for dinosaurs go. But that is mainly it. Of course, there is a lot more to this deck than meets the eye, but I feel like as far as everything goes, it's just another dinosaur deck that focuses on putting a lot of dinosaurs on the battlefield, giving all those abilities that blue have onto the other dinosaurs, and then swinging away in an aggressive strategy. And the last commander deck I wanted to talk about today is a personal favorite of mine, probably my most favorite deck of all time if I'm being honest, because I love Lord of the Rings so much. I mean, if you look behind me, I have like Lord of the Rings everywhere. I don't know if you see it, but a Gollum figure, I have a Smog, I have the books right over there, and of course I have the big giant map behind me. And so of course I had to bring up my Sauron the Dark Lord deck. I also got this a little while ago too, and I wanted to just get it because obviously it's the Eye of Sauron, even though technically the eye is not really in the books, and it's more of a figure of speech. So this used to be a CDH deck, but I decided let's just make it a high power deck because of all the recent bans, because you can't really power out Sauron because this is a 6 mana commander. So I decided let's make it a little bit more casual. So I tried to add as much Lord of the Rings cards that are flavorful with it, but also I wanted to kind of keep a high power level too. So of course with Sauron the Dark Lord, it is a 6 mana commander and it does a lot of things. I actually focus mostly on the bottom thing because this is more of a reanimator strategy. When the ring tempts you, you discard your hand, you draw 4 cards. Those cards you discarded, we can reanimate later on, so that's why I decided to go with a reanimator strategy. Because I wanted this to be more of a flavorful deck, I had to include all the 9 ring wraiths, and I decided to go ahead and put this all in the showcase frames. I wanted everything to be showcase frame foil in the Sauron the Dark Lord deck, which turned out to be a little bit pricier than I thought with the Nazgul. Luckily, I got them before they really spiked, but I do have all 9 Nazgul in here because essentially 3 mana to discard your hand and draw 4 cards is actually a pretty good rate. And also it's pretty funny if you put these all on the battlefield at the same time. You basically put 81 counters on each one of them, so that's pretty powerful in that aspect. And another flavor win is putting the One Ring in this deck. Again, I wanted the showcase foil frame on this one because it matches Sauron the Dark Lord's frame. I wanted to make this as thematic as possible, and of course the One Ring is a no-brainer, even though it's more of a CDH card, and it's a little bit more salty. I decided to throw in here mainly because of flavor. Other flavorful options would be Palantir of Orthanc, Orcish Bowmasters, and the Witch King of Angmar. I almost tempted to actually take the Witch King out because technically there is 9 ring wraiths, so this would make it 10 in the deck. So I'm in that little bit of a dilemma, but I think I might keep it in the deck anyways. Palantir is a great option just to put a lot of creatures in your graveyard so that you can reanimate them later or get a card draw. Either way, it's a win-win for you. Some cards I wanted to put in this deck to reanimate are some dragons like Ancient Silver Dragon and Ancient Brass Dragon. These are great options because card draw and reanimation are a good combination in this deck. Later I'll probably put an Ancient Copper Dragon too, but that's a little too expensive for my taste. I did put both versions of Shieldred in the deck. Shieldred the Apocalypse is a little salty because it'll deal 2 damage to your opponents when they draw cards. I mean, technically it's life loss, but they're losing 2 life every card draw while you're gaining life, and that's what I actually love about this card, is the fact that you can really recover from a lot of loss of life, is because when you discard your hand and draw 4 cards with Sauron, you're essentially gaining 8 life on top of that with Shieldred on the battlefield. And I also do like Shieldred by itself because it does act as a great removal option, and on the backside it basically acts as a Rise of the Dark Realms, so I thought it might be a decent fit in the deck too. Other dragons I wanted to highlight is Dragonlord Quoligan and also Terror of the Peaks. Terror of the Peaks is one of my favorite cards of all time in Magic the Gathering. I thought it's a no-brainer to add them to this deck, especially if we have a lot of cards that reanimate in mass. We can deal a lot of damage when they all enter the battlefield at the same time. And Dragonlord Quoligan is one that I specifically put in here mainly because other creatures you control have haste, not because of that last ability. I just wanted to have some way of giving my creatures haste when they go on the battlefield. They could just swing away. But I do also have some demons in this deck too, like Burning Rune Demon and Razaketh. These are just great options, especially Razaketh because it has that ability of sacrificing a creature, paying 2 life, and you can tutor for any card in your library. This works very well with Sauron's ability because you could sacrifice that 1 Orc army, and when a player casts a spell, you make another Orc army, you could sacrifice that Orc army again, and you could tutor it constantly back and forth. It almost acts like a Ristic Study, but for tutoring. But this is a pretty powerful deck. It'd probably go into the 3-4 range because there are some tutors, but that go to the graveyard like Entomb effects. And there's only like 1 free counter spell with Pact of Negation because it has that Lord of the Rings art. Again, I tried to go as thematic as I could, but there's not really any fast mana and no demonic tutor or anything else like that. It's just really trying to be as as thematic as possible while still maintaining a high power level. And so again, this is one of my favorite decks and one of my favorite commanders, and I should say probably of all time because I love Lord of the Rings so much. But yep, those are all my decks that I do currently own. Just about 10 decks. I'm currently brewing some decks here and there. I don't know if I'm going to put them into paper or not, but I would love to hear your thoughts. What deck is your favorite that you have in your own personal collection? And also make sure to check out my Discord down below in the description so that you could vote which decks I am going to be bringing to MagicCon Las Vegas. I'm super excited to go there this year. Also, I would love to hear your thoughts. Which deck sounds most interesting to you? I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but I'm just trying to get a lot of feedback. So now that I mentioned those, also make sure to check out my Patreon as you can support the channel that way even further. But if not, that's completely fine. If you can, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.